Hello and welcome to episode 22 of series 2 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from the Big Picture People. Before we get into today's interview, I just wanted to give you a quick heads up on what we've got coming up in future episodes. So in 2 weeks' time, on the 17th of August, we have an interview with Neil Jenkins from Iron Mountain, and he's going to be telling us all about employee communications in a large, complex organisation, which is what Neil works in. Really good interview, really interesting insights there. Then on the episode after that, which is episode 24 of this series, which is going out on the 31st of August, we have an interview with Lisa Gwinnell. Now, Lisa works for Siemens and is going to be talking all about how internal comms can earn and maintain its place at the table, i.e. how can we make sure that we are acting as trusted advisors and business partners within our organisation. And Lisa has some really useful insights into her experience in that area, which I think you will find really, really interesting. And then the episode going way into the future, going to the 14th of September, which is the episode 25, we have an interview with Niall Ryan from the Department of Health and Social Care. And Niall's going to be telling us all about how you can maintain and sustain organisational purpose and clarity about organisational purpose when we have a remote workers. And that kind of links in with today's episode as well to a certain extent. So a lot of these themes are recurring and coming around, but from slightly different angles. So I'm hoping you're finding that's useful. On that note, if you do have any feedback for us, we would love to know what you think of the show, if there's any topics you'd like us to cover in the future going forward. So if you have any specific questions or feedback, please let us know. You can either send us an email at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or if you go to our website for the podcast, which is engagingic.com, there is a form on there where you can leave us some feedback. You can leave us anonymous feedback, or you can let us know who you are so we can get back to you. And that we found that really useful in the past in terms of helping us to make sure that we're covering topics that you're interested in and that you'd like to hear about. And finally, just before I go on to today's interview, just to let you know about an event that we are running on the 9th of September. So that's the 9th of September 2021. And that's going to be at 3 p.m. UK time. And this is for any of you who have colleagues, or if you are directly working in, or if you have colleagues working in health and safety in terms of driving communications and training and within the health and safety forum. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be sharing some insights that we have that we've learned over the years about how you can transform your health and safety culture within your organization, and particularly how you can make your training and communications a lot more engaging and something that people enthusiastically participate in. So that is a webinar, a free webinar, I hasten to add, that we're running, as I said, on the 9th of September 2021, and that is at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So if you go to our website, which is thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and along the menu bar at the top, you will see events. And if you scroll down, the first event you'll see is called Transforming Health and Safety Communication and Training. So if you or any of your colleagues work in that area, it would be great to have you come along. You'd be more than welcome. And I think you'll find that a useful and insightful hour. So on that note, we are now going to move on to today's interview. One of the areas that we're all probably aware of and thinking about, regardless of which organisation we work for, is how are we going to continue to engage our remote and virtual and hybrid workers as we come out of the pandemic of 2020 and 2021. And I wanted to find out some of the communications and employee engagement issues that we need to be facing into, which inevitably overlap with many of the HR issues that we'll be considering as well when it comes to bringing people back from the pandemic into a new way of working, whatever that is, whether that's hybrid or whatever we're going to call it. And what are some of the things that we need to be reflecting on? So I went to someone who is an expert in the true sense of the word, someone who has been writing and talking about the importance of hybrid virtual working for 20 to 30 years now. and the world has finally caught up with. And so what we're going to be finding out in this interview is what are some of the things that we've learned from this whole exercise. What are some of the things that as employee engagers and internal communicators we really need to be thinking about our role in reintegrating people into a new way of working? And also, how do we avoid some of the potentiality for some of the subcultures to arise where there are people who are office-based, there are people who are working hybrid, there are people who are working in the field, there are people who've been furloughed, there are people who've not been furloughed. How do we start to bring people back together to ensure that we've got one harmonious culture and not one where there are different ways of working which lead to different subcultures and are divisive? So we've got a lot to cover in this interview, but I say this a lot, but a really, really fantastic interview with a really, really genuine thought leader in this space, which I think you'll find really, really helpful. So my interviewee today is Kevan Hall. Kevan helps organizations and individuals working in remote, hybrid, matrix, and agile ways of working. Kevan is a speaker, consultant, trainer, and the author of leading books such as Leading Remote and Virtual Teams, Making the Matrix Work, Speed Lead, and Kill Bad Meetings. Kevan manages his own team at Global Integration with people in Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Global Integration has 400 clients in over 50 countries and has trained over 150,000 people. Kevan has a background in large multinationals covering international HR, operations management, strategic planning, and people development. So, good morning, Kevan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Good morning.
Fantastic. Where just for the listeners, where are you based at the moment, Kevan? Where are you?
Yeah, under normal circumstances, the answer I always give is on average Heathrow, because I travel a lot. But of course, for the last year and a half, I know exactly where I've been. I've been at home, which is about 40 miles west of London.
Fantastic. Yes, I know you are truly a globetrotter in every sense of the word. I thought I used to do a lot of globetrotting, but you're phenomenal at that. So tell us, I've given an introduction to you, but I know you can probably do a better job. Do you just want to kind of give us a quick overview of what you're really passionate about and what your current focus is at the moment?
Yeah, I guess as with a lot of people who start their own business, it started from a problem that I had that wasn't being met. And when I was working for Mars, the confectionery and pet food and human food business, everybody that I worked with was working across cultures. They were working virtually. They were in a matrix structure. And about 30 years ago, there just wasn't any training that reflected those. Maybe a little bit of the early cross-cultural training. And I was also looking after training for the group at one point, and after complaining for about 6 months that I couldn't buy any training in that area, it suddenly occurred to me there wasn't any training in that area. So 27 years ago, I left around what I think was the world's first remote and virtual teams training program, and also working across cultures. And then as you work on virtual teams, somebody will say, by the way, I have two bosses and they hate each other and they're not aligned, any ideas? And so we got pulled into the matrix. So it was all about ways of working. And of course, more recently, things like agile ways of working and digital ways of working have also come onto the agenda. So it's all about helping people to succeed. So we're not about reporting lines and structure and technology. We're about the leadership and collaboration stuff in large, complex organizations, basically.
Yeah. And as I think I said to you when I reached out to you again, because we've known each other for a while, was that it's like since last March, in March 2020, the kind of world's been catching up with stuff you've been talking about for the last 20, 30 years, which I'm sure made you smile a little bit, but also, is a great opportunity. I mean, what are some of the things? I mean, the pace has been phenomenal, I think, for all of us. What are some of the things that's maybe even surprised someone like you with your depth and understanding of some of the challenges of the the kind of working that we've had to get used to, and the pace and depth that it's taken? What is there anything that surprised you about the last 18 months?
Yes, I mean, obviously there were some special circumstances around this. I mean, a lot of the people issues have been the same issues that people have working remotely. But going back to you said about pace, that was crazy, wasn't it? I mean, if you'd sat down in early 2020, beginning of 2020, and said to someone in a large multinational, I want you to put together a project to send 40% of your people to work from home. And I've asked a few clients, how long do you think that project would have taken? And they said at least 2 years. Now, it turns out you can do it over a weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And so that kind of when you really have to do it, the level of change that you can enact was startling. And in 27 years, the number one objection to remote working consistently has been managerial attitudes to control.
Mm,
People not wanting to have their people out of sight, to be frank.
mm, mm.
And what I think, it's an unprecedented global experiment that said basically people are incredibly adaptive, incredibly trustworthy, incredibly productive when they work from home. And so I kind of hope that this will have killed that historic objection that comes from
Yeah.
people who want to have control. But I am seeing a little bit, maybe we can talk about this later, what I'm calling the Empire Strikes Back, the leaders who weren't very keen on this now trying to find reasons why we should all come back to the office.
Yeah, it's the old theory X, theory Y thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I totally agree. I mean, one of the slides I was using when a few clients of mine, asked if I could just talk with them, because I mean, I'd been working virtually myself for 14 years, so for me it wasn't. But I totally empathized with the kind of magnitude for them, and I had a slide which was just the kind of cat and mouse, which was that whole trust thing about while the cat's away, the mouse will play, and I think that was what I agree with you. That was one of the biggest hurdles to this, and has been a hurdle to this in the past of just if I'm not looking over their shoulder, can I be sure they're actually doing what they're meant to be doing? But I think what for me, and I'd be interested on your thoughts on this, because I know this is something you've espoused, and I think is impossible if you are working virtually, is that you have to get used to measuring people by their outputs, not by their inputs, by their deliverables, not by how they do it, because it's been impossible for people to have any kind of routine. So a lot of people with kids and family commitments. So what are your thoughts around that? And is there anything that I like your Empire Strikes Back analogy. What do you think? What do you I'm not looking to be a crystal ball. What do you think is going to happen there? Then do you think the empire will win this time, or do you think that common sense will prevail?
Yeah, I think when we look back at the last kind of year and a half, I think we have to separate what's about working from home and what's about a pandemic.
Yeah.
Do you remember? 3 years ago, working from home was a perk.
Yes. Yeah.
And so that the experience of trying to survive a pandemic, looking after your family, homeschooling, having anxiety about what's happening in the outside world, and working is very different from the historic experience of remote working. And I do like to separate the two, because I think sometimes they get conflated, and maybe remote working gets blamed for things that are the pandemic and vice versa.
Sure. Yeah.
I do think your point about I'd go beyond outputs as well, because then we start to measure the work. I think outputs are a useful part of performance management in a remote environment, but outcomes are even more important.
Yeah.
Like what happened as a result of these outputs, because if I'm in a clinical trials team and I generate 15 reports, have I done my work, or is my work around getting a drug launched?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in, as far as possible, moving towards outcomes. And I found in my business, on the basis that I wouldn't, everybody was remote, I wouldn't monitor people. People have targets around, revenue level. And I hate being micromanaged myself. I can't bear it. That's one of the reasons I started my own business. I realized that all stress came from other people who disagreed about what I wanted to do.
Yes.
And so I kind of feel that everybody else is the same. So I do like to give a lot of empowerment and flexibility. And so, for example, we don't even monitor things like holidays or hours. We never have them. And if anything, the problem with that is that people overdeliver because of the commitment that you build. So I have more conversations about people remembering to take their holiday and not working too late than concerns about productivity.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
On your question about the kind of Empire Strikes Back stuff, it's quite notable. I think the companies that always struggled with it had a culture of presenteeism, and I've seen a lot in investment banking. No surprise, there are some parts of investment banking, the trading floor, for example. It's very hard to see how you do that remotely. But then that culture then permeates everybody, and so you have senior leaders who are mad keen to get people back into the offices, and they firmly believe, because it's been their own experience, that that's how you build culture, etc., etc. And if you're a great investment bank, for example, I won't name any names, but I'm sure you've seen some of them in the press, the announcements from their CEOs.
Yeah.
If you're a great investment bank, there will be enough people in the world who want to work on your trading floor. You will find enough talent because you pay fantastic money, you're a good company, and. But when you go further down the organization, you're going to be wanting to recruit IT people to support that.
Yeah.
And I'm already hearing from clients around the world. I wrote a blog on it last week. A client in Austria saying our big advantage used to be that we're in Vienna, and Vienna's fantastic. If you ever, who wouldn't
Yeah.
want to live in Vienna? And so they could get people who wanted to live in Vienna. But already in the last 6 months, they're seeing candidates saying, "Well, of course I can live in Vienna, but I can live in Vienna now. I can work for Google. I can work for General Motors. I can work for a Latin American company." That global talent market flexibility is now baked in. And so I think they will have significant disadvantages, or they'll be paying above the odds, or they'll be recruiting a particular type of person. Silicon Valley, I love to go to Silicon Valley. I go there twice a year just to kind of see what's happening. Because a lot of people don't want to live in Silicon Valley or can't afford to live in Silicon Valley. Well, if you open your talent pool globally, the game really changes.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really interesting how this plays out. I do think, people have been working from home for a year and a half. I've got people in my team who never wanted to work from home, but now they're working from home. They're kind of used to it. And you do get inertia.
Yeah.
And so I think initially there'll be some resistance to coming back in the office. Then there'll be like massive enthusiasm because everyone has a lovely time going out for lunch and meeting their colleagues. And then it'll settle back. And I wouldn't be surprised to find out that, people are coming into the office 2 or 3 days a week through preference over time once it starts to reestablish for variety and community and all those kind of things. I'd be surprised if many people vote to come into the office spontaneously on a Friday.
Yeah.
That was already happening, wasn't it? If you drive anywhere around London on a Friday, there's a massive difference in traffic even before the pandemic. So I think that stuff will continue, and maybe that'll apply to Mondays as well.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, and I totally agree. Actually, your point around outcomes, not outputs, is a really important distinction. Actually, so I totally agree with you on that.
I think there's one other thing I'd call out about this, which has been heartwarming. I would even say is that I think the humanization of leadership. I think the focus on well-being. I think the sense that all of us are in the same storm, if not the same boat. And the kind of leveling up that's happened by communicating through video, I think has been very welcome. And I kind of hope that stuff remains on the leadership agenda.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've heard that a lot. I've heard a lot of people talking about it. It's almost taken away the pressure for everything to be perfect, hasn't it? From a communications perspective, it's okay to be, in your living room with your t-shirt on and the dog behind you and all of that sort of thing. It doesn't have to be in a kind of suit and tie in a corporate environment with perfect lighting. I agree. It's much more authentic and much more kind of sustainable as well, I guess, as well. So,
and you learn things about people. You can see their backgrounds, you can see how they live. You kind of I found out things about my team that I'm almost ashamed to say I didn't know.
Yes, exactly.
We tended to meet in the office environment or in front of clients, and so I think that's been healthy.
It's funny actually because I've really enjoyed that exactly that point actually that sort of getting a sense of who people are beyond their work persona. And I've also had a few clients who've insisted on everybody has to have this sort of same Microsoft Teams corporate background, like a banner behind them, and you kind of think okay, fair enough, I kind of see why you're doing it from a professional perspective, but it does sort of take away some of the the kind of the personality behind it as well. So I really want to focus in on focus in on a really, really broad area, if that makes sense. But which is, this podcast is about internal comms and employee engagement. So that's what we try and focus on. We do digress a little bit sometimes, but I'd really like to, and I know obviously communications and engagement is integral to a lot of the work that you do. It's about that kind of cohesiveness and that kind of loose, tight sort of arrangement that we need to have in teams. So I'd really be interested, and it's a really, really general question, so I apologize. But I mean, when we're looking at not just the pandemic related things, but as we move, as we probably recognize, as you've just said, we're probably going to be in a world in a year or two's time where, on average, it'll be a kind of 2 or 3 days in the office, perhaps the rest working from home. What do you see based on not just, what's happened recently, but over your, 20, 30 years of experience of this, so playing some of that into it as well, what are some of the comms and engagement challenges organizations need to be thinking about? Because I think they've kind of coped and sustained and actually developed some really good stuff, as we've just been talking about. But going forward, what do people need to be thinking of now if, this is now going to become the new normal, if you excuse that corny phrase?
Yeah, and I think it's that. It's kind of moving from a situation where we've been giving people emergency toolkits to cope, to say, right, this is now a sustainable, long-term way of operating. And so it would be a tragedy, really, if, having gone through this experience, we went back to the old normal. And so, also the new normal gets a bit overused, but I do think it needs to be different. So I'd start by reflecting on what's been good. And in the area of comms, engagement, as far as I can see from our clients, has gone up. And people do love the flexibility and autonomy of working from home. They've actually appreciated access to their senior leaders. I've had a lot of people saying the communications they've received through video, they felt they were closer to their senior leaders, and maybe there's something about seeing a full-size face on a screen rather than sitting at the back in a town hall of 200 people, which is more face-to-face, if I can use that phrase. It's more immediate. So people have liked that. And I think a lot of senior leaders have as well. So I think let's spend some time reflecting on what's worked well. We've been talking a lot about hybrid meetings with clients recently. And one of the first questions we send is, what was better about virtual meetings? And people say, well, we actually like the discipline. They started on time. People raised hands. They didn't interrupt. And actually it was more inclusive because the introverts like to use chat, and we all got a chance to ask questions, and they sat there in chat, and if they weren't answered, they could come back to them afterwards. And so there's a lot of real good things that happened over the last year. So let's lock those in. Let's not lose those when we get back. Secondly, I think we really need to get our heads around hybrid. I think a lot of companies right now, and it's understandable that they're thinking about how many days a week do I come into the office, and that seems to be 90% of the conversation. So I understand that as the answer has been none for the last year. It's a big question, but it's kind of the wrong question. The real question is, what's the office good for, and when would I use that resource? And the surveys are showing that the office wins out over remote working in only a small number of areas, like use of specialty equipment, socializing, maybe culture building, informal learning, those kind of things. And so those are the things that we need to organize for when we're in the office. So, if I was an internal comms person, I'd be thinking about how do we get people together and what to do? How are we going to make this? There's this idea of osmotic learning, that just by being in the office, you learn things. Or serendipity, where you bump into people in the coffee machine and you launch this, you find this brilliant idea. I think a lot of that's a myth, actually. Not only that, but I would say to comms people, if you rely on chance encounters to get across important information, that's actually a failure in your communication plan. If you can't do better than chance, then you're failing. And so I think this has got to be an interesting area. How do you organize the communities, the networks, the communities of practice, and the informal connections to make sure that important information travels better than chance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's one of the things we've been talking about to clients, and obviously what we do, which is, there's a real sort of risk, I think, that we just sort of drift back into, this new normal and don't take a chance to kind of debrief people, because I think people have been through a fantastic learning opportunity, like we just said, 10 years, 5 to 10 years of transformation in 18 months. And they've probably learned a lot about themselves, about their resilience, about their, and left to their own devices may not reflect on it, So I think there's a huge opportunity when people do come back. Yes, you could probably do it via, remotely, but I do think it is going to be quite an emotional experience where being together and being able to kind of read people better than you could probably do through virtually will be really important. So I think having a process just to debrief people, but like you say, going forward, when we do bring people together, with some structure around the kind of things we want to talk about and how we want to make best use of that time, and not just, like you say, you're relying on kind of Brownian motion for people to sort of bump into each other and have these chance conversations.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely makes sense to me. Yeah, definitely.
I think also, it depresses me a little bit, particularly how bad governments are at learning from other governments around the world. I don't think we did a very good job of learning from the experiences that places like, South Korea had, for example, during SARS, where a lot of the lessons they learned then they implemented successfully this time around. China's already 6 months into hybrid working.
Yeah.
We're starting to do reviews with Chinese clients saying, okay, we've been doing this for 6 months. What's worked, what hasn't? And so, for example, what we're finding is people are spontaneously saying, right, we're having a company Thursday where everybody comes in one Thursday a month. And in the afternoon, there are no meetings, just so that we can kind of have that. We're in the same place. We can bump into people and those kind of things. And I think that stuff will evolve. And hybrid is so complex. There's so many moving parts that I think a lot of hybrid teams are putting their blinkers on. They're looking at their own pattern of work and their own way of working, and they're not looking more broadly across the organization. So there will be a need to kind of reconnect that stuff. I'll give you an extreme example. Companies, we have clients who are saying, okay, we're going to come into the office 60% of the time. We're giving people flexibility to work out their own pattern. And actually, we're cutting out 40% of our desks. And I said, well, at a crude level, that sounds as though mathematically it will work out. But if you give people flexibility, how many are going to come in on a Monday or Friday?
Yeah.
Not. And so you're going to get 100% occupancy for 3 days a week.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't work out. So there is a lot of moving parts, and you will not get it right. So I would strongly recommend that people see this as a trial and an experiment and position it as such, because they will need to evolve this as they go along. It's not going to work perfectly first time out of the box.
And I guess that in and of itself is going to be a bit we've learned that some organizations that maybe weren't traditionally good at that, but this whole kind of emergent approach to strategy. I mean, again, I think that hopefully, again, a reflection point for me from the kind of pandemic and how quickly organizations managed to adapt to that is that, we don't need to spend months planning things to the nth degree. We can actually learn constructively and without, kind of gambling the business through experimentation and failing fast and all of this sort of stuff, and amplifying what works, and hopefully, as you say, that will carry forward into finding the way forward in the future for people that works for everybody or the majority of people anyway.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, my fear is that people will then say, "Oh, that the problem is remote working, and therefore we all come back into the office." Now, I think that's an easy solution, but I do think there is tremendous pressure, and particularly from recruiters I'm hearing now. One of the first questions that everybody asks is, "What's your flexible working policy?"
Yeah.
And so I think the talent war will be a strong motivator to get this right. But a lot of our clients are huge. We've got clients with millions of employees, many clients with hundreds of thousands. There's a lot of moving parts to get right.
Yeah. No. I just want to use that as an opportunity then just to move on to another question that I had. I'd be really interested in getting your viewpoint on, which I've picked up through the conversations, and again we our clients similar to yours, very diverse. Some with people who've worked throughout, some people who've had to furlough people, some people who've had to, basically everybody went remote. But one of the things I have picked up is that a concern around almost, for whatever the reasons we've talked about, there will be some people who just life has not changed. Key workers, call them what we will. People who work for water companies who are out fixing water mains. Their life hasn't changed. They haven't. It has changed maybe around the periphery, but broadly speaking, their jobs stayed the same. And then there are people then who are kind of now got this sort of nice, working from home and all of the attractiveness that comes with that. And I've picked this up in a few conversations I've had with people where there has been a kind of it has been divisive, and people have been working hard to maintain that, not that the non-divisiveness of it, and keep cohesion and between people. I mean, do you perceive that going forward, organizations, internal comms people, employee engagement, HR are going to have to do something differently to keep that cohesiveness together, or is something they're going to have to think about that they've not thought about before?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely needs to be on the agenda, and like you know, we've picked up some tensions around that. I mean, you know, during the height of the lockdown in the UK, for example, one of our clients, you know, the HR people weren't allowed to go on site, and so the people who they were supporting were working and saying, okay, so it's okay for us to come on site, but it's too risky for a
Mm,
HR person to come on site, you know,
mm,
and so you do get some of those things, and I think you know what people are like. Everyone is the hero in their own story, so everyone thinks they had the toughest time. So if you continue to work, you feel like you held the company together. If
mm,
you work from home with all the distractions and you put in long hours to make it work, you feel like you know you held the company together. And the people on furlough who were sent home, they think they had it toughest because you know they literally didn't have anything to do, and other
mm,
people feel, yeah, but they got paid for doing nothing. And so there are all those messages going on. So I do think there will be some repair. And you know when we can get together, I think there's going to be a desire to maybe celebrate's not the right word, but to acknowledge what happened
yeah.
and to process what happened. And we find there's a tremendous desire for people to talk about their experiences on
Mm,
our webinars. Um, so, how are you going to recognize those different groups and the contributions they made? I mean, I've
mm,
seen quotes from again, from the Empire Strikes Back lobby saying, well, the people who came into the office basically held it together and paid for everybody else. I'm not sure if I was somebody working from home for 15 months, I'd be particularly motivated by that
yeah.
statement. So
Yeah.
there will be some repair to do. And I think, by the way, it's not only those groups. I think, you know, leaders will have left a leadership legacy during this period. And some
Mm,
have done it brilliantly and some have not done it very well at all. And I
mm,
think for those latter group, they've got a lot of ground to catch up.
mm,
Um, so I think there's all those things going. I think a couple of things I've mentioned before, like the kind of mixing the Chinese mixing once a month days, um, getting out of the silos and making sure that we you know there's a trade off in a lot of well in all organisations between coordination and flexibility. And I think at the
mm,
moment people are talking a lot about flexibility, you know, trying to give people choice, which is admirable. But also you will have to run a business, and at some point, you know, a manager will say, "No, actually, I need you to come to this meeting." And you know, people may have different views about that, and so I think there's a little bit of a reset necessary in some of those.
mm,
And then also there's some stuff which is, you know, there's a common objection at the moment that says, you know, because of proximity bias, people who don't come into the office have less opportunities for development and career progression and those kind of things, which was certainly true before the pandemic. It was well established that people, for example, who are at headquarters tended to get promoted because
yeah.
you're in people's minds, you're more visible, you know, for all those reasons. Now, we can either accept that and say, yeah, that is a problem, in which case that is likely to mean that anyone who really, really wants to get ahead will come into the office just to be seen.
Mm,
Or we can say, actually, no, we need to change our processes so that things like succession, development, visibility are handled equally for people who are physically present and remote.
mm, mm.
And that's a bigger challenge. But if we really want to make a hybrid culture work, we've got to solve that.
Yeah, yeah. As I think, yeah, I agree. Because I mean, if you think about it, the danger is sort of confirmation bias. If we only promote people who are kind of around the office, then what are they going to do? Well, they're going to kind of value being in the office, and it's almost like we're kind of selecting out that remote capability, which is, as you know, is being able to work effectively remotely is a skill, and it requires development. And we've learned over the last 18 months, some people, how tough it is, but to be productive and work away from the office without, if that's not what you're used to. So yeah. So I know when we spoke a few weeks ago, I kind of threw in the term feral, and that I was interested just from a kind of human observation perspective that maybe for people who at the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was rocking up on Microsoft Teams meetings, really well presented. And then gradually people have become more and more relaxed and casual. And I guess, we have developed our own little habits. And I've always been really conscious of, how I conduct myself when I work on my own. And then how, when I do get with people, and because I've been used to that for a long time. I mean, what do you see what are some of the things you think we need to, and this is again a really general question, but relearn when we do eventually come back to a more hybrid way of working? You know, what are some of the things we need to be mindful of with people, with teams, that help them integrate back into a more, you know, kind of a community, you know, physical being in the same space together? Do you see any challenges around that? And what are the
Yeah, I
first things?
do. I think people adapt. People are very adaptable. And we've adapted to an environment where we sit at home and do things exactly the way we want to do things. So I think there's a number of things. I mean, firstly, people take extraordinary things for granted very quickly. I'm already hearing stories from people who say, now that they're starting to talk about people coming into the office. I mean, it sounds crazy. People say, well, it's not really convenient for me anymore because I got a dog. Or I've taken on caring responsibility for my mother, and I don't think I can come into the office regularly. Or another one saying, "Oh yeah, by the way, I've moved countries." And they just say, I can't come into the office. Is it okay if you keep paying me indefinitely?
Yeah.
And so there's going to be some what seemed like perfectly reasonable, but apparently going to be quite tough conversations about re-establishing, what being at work means in some cases, particularly for people maybe who've been on furlough. Or have maybe been using the flexibility in a different way than we thought. The furrow thing made me laugh when you said it, and it really made me think actually, because I like anything like that, and I did a blog and a cartoon around it. And I think that the immediate thought was maybe we'll have bands of badly dressed employees shambling around the office. Descending on the cafeteria for the first hot meal in ages. But I don't think it's going to be that. But I do think there will be, for example, if you've been working from home and you've had more autonomy, naturally you're going to be a bit more resistant to control that you don't think is adding value. I talked to a very senior guy, and a Danish client of ours, and he'd driven. This was about 6 months ago. That would have actually last summer, and he'd driven to a meeting. He hadn't been to a meeting for quite a while. It was the first chance he'd had to go to a face-to-face meeting, and he was outraged when he got back. He said, "I drove for an hour and a half." He said it was a completely pointless and badly run meeting, and then I drove back again. He said, "I'm not doing that anymore." And I think that could be positive, that kind of pushback that says we're actually not prepared to put up with some of the, I won't use the word, but some of the stuff that used to happen in corporations. So I'm kind of looking forward to a little bit of the revolution there, I've got to say. So that maybe is a positive thing. I think there's a negative thing, which is the anxiety about coming back to work. I mean, I think we will have a lot of people who are anxious about public transport and being in an office and those kind of things. And I think governments have pushed up anxiety deliberately as a way of kind of getting people to follow perfectly reasonable rules on social distancing, etc. But there's going to be quite some work, I think, to re-socialize people into what will always be a level of risk. I think it'll be similar to the risk we have from flu. It's still there, but we live with it. And I think it will take a while for people to get over that. And some people, it will be genuine, and as always, there'll be some people who use that as a bit of an excuse for other agendas. So that needs managing. And I think more generally in the office is just that getting back into a culture of consideration and tolerance for other people. I'm hearing a lot of people say, I'm back in the office now, but everyone's shouting on virtual calls, talking very loudly. You just can't concentrate. Some noise levels, a lot of people focusing on the individual patterns that they want for themselves and their teams without necessarily consideration for their colleagues. And teams are going to have to sit down, and they are going to have to make some trade-offs. I'm going to have to trade off some of my flexibility in order to support yours. And we're going to have to find a middle way. And I think we might have fallen out of the habit of that over the last year.
Yeah. I think helping people to be self-aware, because I mean, I'm conscious of I've developed some, nothing worrying, but I know if I looked at myself and observed myself, 2 years ago, if I observed me now, I would see some really strange kind of character traits. I would never have gone out for a walk every hour, every morning, in the old world, and I do it now, and it's kind of my new. So that isn't particularly a bad habit, but I'm sure we have probably. Because it's been kind of relatively slow evolution of how we've adapted to this over 18 months, we'll have probably be doing things now that are quite sort of peculiar that we're not aware of. So I do think that like you say, a kind of culture of being okay and I also think we're going to it's almost like when you know, will only kind of, it's almost like there'll be a mild form of, well, not mild, but maybe even profound form of PTSD almost afterwards, when it's only really when we're out of it that we kind of go, flipping out, what have we just been through, and what have I just sustained, and again, I think that allowing people to open up, and as you said earlier, I think it's really good that people have got a much more acute, and I hope genuine interest in mental health and well-being, and then that isn't just, you know, kind of, oh, well, we've done the pandemic now, so we don't need to worry about that. I hope that kind of carries on as well.
I think so. Well, I also just some of the practices stuff, you know, I mean, I run training courses, you know, and I've run training courses for 30 years, so I kind of know how to do it. I've run webinars for 15 years, so I kind of know how to do that as well. And so, but for the last year and a half, my stage, if you like, has been a 90-minute to 2.5-hour webinar. I think we do a great job of those, and they're very interactive and all the rest. But the first time I stand up in front of a group of 25 people, and I've got 2 days with them, and we're doing it all face to face, I'm going to have to relearn some stuff.
Oh yeah.
You know, and I'm sure it's still there, but I'm sure when I do that for the first time, it'll be a bit strange.
Yeah. I've got one of those coming up in a few weeks, and I've been having calls with everybody talking about, you know, you know, what do you want to get out of the meeting? What, you know, what's your kind of priorities for it? 'Cause it's a strategic session. And one of the things that's come across to me in that is that I also, you know, don't forget, this is the first time I've been in a room with, I'm not going to just kind of switch on and be kind of like on my A game. And I'm thinking I'm the same, you know, I need to give myself a bit of permission to be human and recognize that I'm not just going to immediately flick into, you know, super facilitation mode when I've not done it for nearly 2 years face to face with anyone. So yeah, it is going to be kind of weird for everybody, I think. And I think it's just that, like you say, I think it's that ability just to be empathetic to the fact that we're all, and some people will obviously adapt more quickly than others, but yeah. That's been really, really fascinating, Kevan, as I hoped. And there's millions more other things I'd love to talk to you about. I mean, just summarizing, I mean, you know, I think we covered some really, really powerful areas. And rather than me summarize, is there any one thing you'd really like to sort of just leave as a sort of final nugget of wisdom for anyone who's sort of leading an agenda around getting people back to work, leading a kind of hybrid working type project or anything like that? Any one or two? I know it's really, really reductionist, but anything that you'd sort of just top tips, as it were.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is kind of a roadmap, if you like, of the skills for this hybrid environment. And I think some people are saying, well, we know how to do remote, we know how to do face-to-face, so putting them together will be easy. But managing two modes is harder than managing either one or the other. And so I think we do need to focus on the detail of this. So right now, the priority for a lot of companies is equipping leaders to manage a conversation around flexibility with their people. And I think a lot of leaders are uncomfortable about that. It's a new type of conversation. I think we need to equip them about that. The second thing is hybrid meetings. I think that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. You know, how do we run a meeting where 8 people are in the room and 4 are joining remotely? And a lot of international teams have worked that way, and usually the meetings were terrible. The people who joined remotely didn't feel included. They didn't feel as though it was their decision. So and also, by the way, meetings culture has become a bit dysfunctional over the last 12 months. Too many meetings, dawn to dusk webinars. So we've got to reset our meetings culture for hybrid and also to make it sustainable. And then thirdly, we need to get into this kind of leadership stuff, you know, and if there's a good chance that nearly every team containing managerial and professional people will be a hybrid team, or certainly a large proportion of them. And so every soft skill you have will be exercised in a hybrid environment. The way you present, the way you facilitate a meeting, the way you lead people, the way you do team building. So there's actually quite a lot. And it's not, by the way, it's not 100% different, but it is 10, 15% different. So we're going to have to just adjust all of our leadership and collaboration practices. And I think people are underestimating how much of a piece of work that is.
No, I agree. No, I think that's really, 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 really powerful. So fantastic. So I normally ask this at the end, but I'm going to ask it sort of I've got another question, but I'm coming to that. What resources that we can kind of signpost people to? And obviously your website, Global Integration, I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Is there any articles, white papers, any content that you'd like me to particularly flag up around the topic that we've been talking about today? And I'll put that in the show notes.
Okay, I think the website is the best place to go.
Okay.
On the website, there is for each of the topic areas, there are white papers, there's a couple of free webinars, there's books and all kinds of things. So that's the place to look. Alternatively, follow us on social media. You'll find us easily enough if you look for Global Integration or for me, Kevan with an A, Hall. And
Yes.
we publish a blog every week. And our strategy is to be very open about our ideas.
Yeah.
So you'll find everything is fairly transparent.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile as well if anybody wants to message you or reach out to you personally as well. That's fantastic. So anyway, as I said, the sort of slightly reverse order, the final question, which I ask all of my interviewees, which is, and I've known you for a while, so I'd be interested to know. Something I always ask is somebody, people who know you reasonably well, work with your colleagues, friends, etc., something they don't know about you, either something you've done, something you do now that's a kind of guilty secret that you're willing to share with my audience.
Well, they say, don't they, that there's a big overlap between CEOs and psychopaths, so I'm not going to admit feeling any guilt about this. But my son was reading a book about different personality styles, and one of the personality styles was the rebel. And he keeps bringing it up and laughing about this because I temperamentally cannot follow rules, which is difficult as a CEO because when I set up rules for the organization, which I try and do as little of as possible, I can't even follow my own rules, which kind of undermines it. And so I dislike anything that puts me in a box. So even, for example, on Spotify, if they recommend a playlist, I won't use it because I feel like they're pigeonholing me. Or if, we have a Peloton, and on the Peloton, if I do a class that I really like, I think, well, I won't do that one again because there might be another one that's better. I think it helps me in my work because I'm always trying to think about things a different way, always trying to be countercultural. But I'll even, if I'm going to the same place regularly, I'll try and always drive a different way.
Yeah. Wow. That is rebellious.
So I even rebel against myself.
I kind of get that. I mean, people have asked me, it's 2000. I'm trying to do the maths. 14 years since I had a corporate role, and people, and the people don't ask it anymore now, but as often as they did. But back at the beginning, people would say, "Do you think you'll ever go back to having a corporate job?" But then you become unemployable from a corporate perspective. I couldn't. I'm like you. I mean, I'm not maybe not as rebellious as you, but I couldn't follow rules. I mean, interesting, you do end up, you're still working for someone. It just happens that they're clients, and you've still got to kind of bend a little bit. You can't be. But I agree with you. It is. It's hugely liberating, and we're extremely lucky to be able to do what we do, and I'm always grateful for that. And but you're right, it's a good trait to have, and I love your analogy there that you right, because I know what you mean. You've got to write procedures and policies, and I'm always getting berated for, well, you didn't follow your own procedure. That you've told us that everything needs to be proceduralized, but you kind of don't follow them yourself. You're always kind of reinventing them. So yeah, I totally understand that. So
well, luckily, I've hired some people who actually quite like to follow process, and so they quietly follow a process and don't tell me about it.
And they're rebelling in their own little way as well. So, oh, brilliant! Well, look, that's been absolutely fantastic, Kevan. I know you're off on your holidays after today, so have a lovely break, and thank you very much for sharing your wisdom. As I say, I may get you back at some point in the future because I know there's hundreds of other stones we left unturned there, but I think you've given us a really good overview of a very contemporary issue that I think our listeners will find really useful.
No, thank you. And it's certainly every company in the world is talking about it right now. So it's nice to see so much interest. I'm not used to the topics I trade in being on the BBC website every day. And so it's kind of nice that the conversation is getting more widespread.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as I said at the beginning, the world's finally caught up with you, Kevan. So long overdue. But yeah, well, thank you very much anyway, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. So thank you for listening to Engaging Internal Comms. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. We'd love to hear your thoughts about the show and any questions, ideas, or feedback that you'd have. Anything you'd like us to cover on future episodes too, please. So you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. or you can get in touch with us via the contact form at engagingic.com. You can also sign up to our mailing list there, and we'll send you relevant news about the show and anything that we think you might be interested in when it comes to internal communications and employee engagement. If you like the show and you haven't already done so, please subscribe to it directly via your podcast service. And you can also subscribe via the links on our podcast page, which again is engagingic.com. If you like the show, we'd be really grateful if you could leave us a review, and also if you could leave some verbal feedback there as well, not just stars. That's always nice to know that we've been appreciated, and particularly how we've helped you. If you know anyone else who might like the show or might benefit from it, please tell them, please share it with them. Please share the link to our website, engagingic.com. And that will be great, because we want to grow our community. We want to get as many people involved in the show as possible. And the bigger, the better. Okay, thank you.